The studio lights dimmed as the anchor's voice dropped to a somber tone. In breaking news today, she announced, Tyler Robinson, a U.S. national, has been identified as the lead suspect in the assassination of political commentator Charlie Kirk. The room froze. Across Africa and the world, people paused their routines to hear the rest. But it wasn't the anchor's words that would make headlines, it was the voice that came next, Captain Ibrahim Traoré. Traoré stepped forward in a darkened hall filled with African leaders and international press. His face was stone. His voice, sharp and deliberate. They murdered a man who stood, spoke, and questioned, because truth offends the powerful. But let it be known today, Africa watches. Africa remembers. And Africa judges. He looked directly into the camera. Tyler Robinson, he said, your crime was not only against one man, but against every voice that dares to rise. You struck him down, thinking silence would follow. But you ignited thunder. Around the world, social media lit up. Hashtags like #JusticeForKirk, #TraorSpeaks, and #NoMercyForMurder trended within minutes. Commentators debated whether Traoré had just declared a new global justice doctrine. But no one questioned his resolve. When asked by a journalist what penalty would satisfy such a crime, Traoré didn't hesitate. Only death can repay this crime. And if there is no law willing to carry it out, then perhaps Africa will write its own. The room erupted. Some in awe, others in protest. But everyone listened. This was not just a statement. This was a warning. And the world had just heard it loud and clear. The sun hung heavy over the crowd as mourners gathered beneath the African sky. White roses lined the front of the memorial stage. But no one spoke. The silence was sacred, until the armored vehicle rolled up, and Captain Ibrahim Traoré stepped out. Clad in ceremonial military attire, Traoré walked to the podium without notes, without hesitation. Behind him, a screen displayed the words. Justice is not a gift. It is a reckoning. He stood before the crowd, eyes locked on the coffin draped with both American and African fabrics, a symbol of Charlie Kirk's transcontinental influence. But today wasn't about memory. It was about consequences. Traoré spoke slowly, today, we do not just bury a man. We bury the illusion that voices can be silenced without response. He raised his hand toward the cameras. Tyler Robinson, you ended a life. Now the world must decide, will we end impunity? Gasps echoed through the square. It wasn't just a eulogy, it was a declaration. International news networks aired it live. In Washington, commentators scrambled to interpret Traoré's tone. Was it a call for legal justice, or something more final? Back in Africa, the people understood. There was weight in Traoré's words. Some crimes, he continued, are not answered in courtrooms. They demand a justice that wears no robes. At that moment, a drone flew over the crowd, displaying the message in 3 languages. You thought Africa would be quiet. You were wrong. The tension in global politics cracked like glass. Traoré wasn't just mourning, he was mobilizing. And for the first time in years, the world realized, this young African leader was not here to play defense. He had just declared war on silence itself. 3 days after the funeral, a packed press room in Ouagadougou buzzed with anticipation. Journalists from CNN, Al Jazeera, BBC, and Pan-African outlets had flown in overnight. Traoré was about to speak, and everyone knew it wouldn't be diplomacy as usual. He entered the room without security flanking him, a subtle act of defiance. The cameras focused, and silence followed. Then, his voice cut through the tension. We buried Charlie Kirk. But we will not bury justice. The room fell still. Flashbulbs fired. A reporter from the New York Times asked, Captain Traoré, do you call for Tyler Robinson's execution? He didn't blink. When a man commits a crime soaked in political hatred, meant to ignite fear, then yes. I do. I call for capital justice. Not for revenge. For balance. The temperature in the room shifted. Some whispered radical, others revolutionary. But no one dared look away. He continued, we are no longer asking for justice. We are demanding it. And when justice does not come, Africa must deliver it with its own hand. This wasn't just about one man's crime. It was about reclaiming control, about Africa writing its own code of consequence. Traoré pointed directly at the journalists. You wrote about Kirk. Now write this: Africa will not remain passive while bullets dictate politics. Outside, a growing crowd chanted in unison. Their signs read, Justice for Charlie. Power to the people. No more silence. In Washington, the State Department scrambled. The White House was briefed. Tyler Robinson had vanished. International tension simmered. But Traoré didn't waver. In a final statement that would headline every global outlet, he said, This is not about diplomacy. This is about dignity. And when dignity bleeds, it bleeds fire. The world didn't just hear his words, they felt the aftershock. The international community tried to stay neutral. Statements were released with careful wording, deeply concerned, urge restraint, monitoring the situation. But in Burkina Faso, neutrality was cowardice. Traoré stepped into his national broadcast studio, not to plead, but to challenge. Behind him, a black banner read, Silence is the weapon of oppressors. Charlie Kirk was not African, he began. But his death is a scar on African dignity. If a foreign voice can be silenced for defending our cause, then no voice is safe. He paused. And if Tyler Robinson walks free, then no one is guilty. And if no one is guilty, then every future killer is innocent by example. The words were not just for his nation. They were aimed at global leaders, especially the ones hiding behind platitudes. The U.S. had yet to officially condemn the act. The UN called for a full investigation. Europe kept quiet. Traoré shook his head. You don't need an investigation to see what justice looks like. You need courage. A journalist tried to interrupt. But Captain Traoré, don't you risk isolating your country with these demands? He turned sharply. If isolation is the price of integrity, then let the world turn its back. Burkina Faso will not trade spine for comfort. This moment wasn't about politics. It was a reckoning. Tyler Robinson had become a symbol of impunity, of Western privilege, of what happens when justice is optional. Outside the studio, crowds marched with signs that read, You kill one of us, you answer to all of us. Justice is not a debate. Traoré speaks for us all. The movement had outgrown one country. Pan-African youth leaders from Nigeria, Ghana, and South Africa released joint statements backing Traoré's call. Hashtags like #JusticeForCharlie and #NoMoreSilence surged globally. And still, no word from Tyler Robinson. But Traoré wasn't done. History doesn't remember silence. It remembers those who refuse to be silent. That night, Traoré's phone call to the International Criminal Court wasn't a diplomatic request. It was a demand. Tell me, he said to the representative, how many Africans would have to die before you act without hesitation? There was silence on the other end. And how many white killers must walk free before you call it justice? The voice on the other line gave a generic response, We're monitoring the situation closely. Traoré ended the call. You monitor. We act. A few hours later, he stood before a gathering of West African defense ministers. On the agenda, establishing a tribunal for crimes committed on African soil by foreign nationals. He pointed to the screen behind him where Tyler Robinson's image was displayed. He was no different than a mercenary, Traoré said. Except he didn't need a weapon. He had impunity. The ministers shifted in their seats. This wasn't a usual regional summit. This was a war council in disguise. We don't want vengeance, Traoré continued. We want precedent. He slammed a folder on the table, an outline for a regional arrest warrant that would make Tyler Robinson persona non grata in over 15 African nations. It would be the first time in modern history that African nations collectively targeted a Western citizen for trial over a political assassination. Outside, thousands gathered in Ouagadougou's Revolution Square. Drone footage showed a sea of signs. You let him kill. We won't let him live free. Africa writes its own justice. Death for death. Traoré didn't need international support anymore. He had the support of a continent. From Lagos to Nairobi, protesters lit candles for Charlie Kirk. But they also lit fires of resistance, of redefinition, of reclaiming justice. Tyler Robinson had crossed a line. And Africa, led by Traoré, had drawn a new one in blood and fire. As news of Traoré's condemnation of Tyler Robinson echoed through international outlets, Western commentators rushed to frame the response as extreme. On a popular U.S. network, a host sneered, "Death sentence? For what? Political tension?" But Traoré wasn't backing down. In a press conference aired live across 27 African nations, he looked directly into the camera and said, "You stole a voice from Africa. You silenced a guest on our soil. And you think there is no price?" He leaned forward. "That price is life." The room fell silent. Journalists scribbled notes. Activists posted quotes in real time. His words spread like fire on social media, amplified by millions who had felt the sting of historic injustice. The broadcast cut to footage of Charlie Kirk's final speech in Burkina Faso, a fiery call for cooperation between youth movements in Africa and the West, a moment of unlikely unity. That moment was gone now, snatched by a bullet many believed had political fingerprints. Robinson, who had gone into hiding, was now the most wanted man on the continent. Traoré's Justice Ministry released official documentation, charges of assassination, foreign interference, and destabilization of a sovereign state. An international legal coalition formed to support the trial. But what shocked observers most wasn't the pursuit of justice. It was what came next. Traoré proposed the Kirk Pact, a multinational accord among African nations declaring that any political killing on their soil would be met with maximum sentencing, regardless of the perpetrator's nationality. "We are no longer children begging for trials in your courts," he said. "Africa now tries its own criminals." His eyes didn't blink. His voice didn't shake. And for the first time in decades, the world saw an African leader declare war, not with tanks, but with law, with moral fury, and with a continent behind him. In Washington, the White House remained unusually silent. No statement, no press conference, not even a tweet. The world noticed. Commentators across Europe speculated, was the U.S. government distancing itself from Tyler Robinson? Or were they scrambling to protect someone who had served their foreign policy interests too well? Meanwhile, Traoré addressed the African Union, standing beneath the golden emblem of unity, his voice steady. "If the West refuses to condemn this crime, they are complicit." Thunderous applause erupted from the Assembly Hall. Leaders who had long remained diplomatic now shifted their stance. Ghana, Senegal, and even South Africa, nations known for their careful neutrality, issued formal support for Traoré's pursuit of justice. Tyler Robinson's photo was now posted at every airport from Dakar to Dar es Salaam. Interpol had issued a red notice. His name was no longer hidden in government files, it was printed in bold across front pages in 3 languages, English, French, and Arabic. But back in Burkina Faso, a more emotional scene unfolded. In a candlelight vigil at Place de la Révolution, citizens gathered with signs reading, "Justice for Charlie." Traoré speaks for us all. One elderly man, who remembered French colonial police kicking indoors, whispered to a journalist. This time, they won't get away with it. Not under him. The global tide was turning. Analysts describe Traoré's reaction not just as outrage, but as doctrine, a clear message that African lives, voices, and leaders would no longer be disposable. And while Western anchors debated legalities, Africans everywhere were watching something more powerful unfold. A leader refusing to be silenced. A continent saying, enough. And a man, Ibrahim Traoré, turning one tragedy into a political earthquake. The world expected a trial. News anchors debated international extradition laws. Legal analysts dissected the Geneva Conventions. But Traoré had no intention of waiting for tribunals that had historically failed Africa. In a bold and chilling press briefing, he addressed both local and international media. Justice delayed is justice denied. If the West shelters murderers, we will judge them ourselves. A stunned silence followed. In Washington, the State Department scrambled to respond, issuing a generic statement about ongoing investigations. But in Ouagadougou, Tyler Robinson had become a symbol, not just of foreign interference, but of impunity. And Traoré made it personal. He revealed intercepted communications, encrypted messages linking Robinson not only to Kirk's death, but to prior destabilization attempts across West Africa. Audio clips, satellite records, and whistleblower testimonies, all made public in a chilling exposé titled, Hands Drenched in Blood. The people were enraged. Protests broke out, not just in Burkina Faso, but in Nigeria, Ghana, and Mali. The hashtag Justice for Charlie was trending worldwide. African youth, once politically disengaged, now chanted in unison. We remember. We resist. We retaliate. Meanwhile, in a rare joint appearance, Traoré and the Minister of Justice stood before a crowd of 40,000 at Independence Square. The president's message was unflinching. No courtroom can contain the weight of this crime. No jury can carry the sorrow of a continent. The crowd roared. Drums thundered. Flags waved. Justice wasn't a legal procedure anymore, it had become a movement. And while foreign leaders urged caution, their words sounded like echoes from a fading world order, one in which power excused everything. But not anymore. Africa had drawn a red line. And Traoré held the pen. The weight of Traoré's words rippled far beyond Burkina Faso. In Europe, think tanks scrambled to publish white papers titled Africa's Rising Hawk and Justice or Vengeance. On American talk shows, pundits debated whether Traoré had crossed a diplomatic line, or simply drawn one the West could no longer ignore. But in Africa, there was no confusion. His declaration had become doctrine. Murals of Charlie Kirk went up in Accra, Nairobi, and Dakar, not as a symbol of the West, but as a warning. This is what silence protects, one graffiti read, sprayed over a collapsed colonial statue. Meanwhile, Tyler Robinson had vanished. Interpol issued alerts. His name buzzed across intelligence networks. Anonymous leaks suggested he had fled to a European safe house under a false identity. Yet, Traoré seemed unfazed. In a televised address, he declared, "They can shield him behind borders, but truth travels without a passport." At a UN summit, diplomats expected Traoré to soften his tone. Instead, he raised a photo of Charlie Kirk in one hand and Robinson's mugshot in the other. This is not justice versus revenge. This is guilt versus conscience. The assembly fell silent. No applause, no protest, just the realization that the old balance of power was cracking. In secret meetings, Western powers debated sanctions. But economic threats felt hollow. Africa had found something more valuable than trade agreements. Conviction. And as night fell over Ouagadougou, citizens lit candles at Independence Square, surrounding a statue of Traoré. Children held signs that read, "We remember the fallen. We demand the condemned." This wasn't just one nation's pain. It had become a continental pulse. From the Sahel to the Cape, the message was clear. No one kills the future of Africa and escapes its memory. The world held its breath as Traoré addressed the African Union for the final time on the matter. The setting was deliberate, not a courtroom, but a roundtable of nations. No judges in robes, only leaders with legacies on the line. Cameras rolled. Western networks were warned not to cut the feed. This time, Africa wanted its voice broadcast unedited. Traoré stood, his uniform without medals, his hands empty but commanding. Behind him, a single photo of Charlie Kirk flickered on the screen, no slogans, just his face and a date. The crime was not only murder. It was the message that his life meant nothing. The silence in the room was absolute. He continued. "We are not calling for chaos. We are demanding calibration. If a man's death shakes a continent, then justice must answer with equal weight." Some foreign delegates shifted uncomfortably. Death penalty debates resurfaced. Human rights NGOs began releasing statements in real time. But African citizens had already decided. Hashtags surged, hashtag justice for Charlie, hashtag Traoré speaks truth, hashtag no more silence. Meanwhile, a breakthrough, leaked drone footage showed a man resembling Tyler Robinson fleeing through rural Poland. Traoré didn't flinch. He simply raised a document, the draft of a multilateral treaty between West African states to recognize universal jurisdiction over crimes against their citizens. A new order was forming, not just politically, but legally. It wasn't vengeance. It was precedent. And as Traoré concluded with a voice steady as steel, "We are not asking the world to agree. We are telling the world we've already decided." The room erupted, not in applause, but in understanding. For the first time in decades, Africa had spoken in one voice, and it echoed louder than any verdict. Outside, crowds waited not for a headline, but for history.